How many of you have never seen me? Wow, all right. Don't feel bad, a lot of people haven't. When me and my buddy Skeeter were growing up, we had a buddy named Uncle Debo. Now, Uncle Debo was not our uncle. In fact, Uncle Debo was a year younger than we were. But everybody in town called him Uncle Debo because Uncle Debo was the last and quite unexpected of 17 children. And when he was born, his parents retired, and they couldn't think of a name. His brothers and sisters had normal names like, Noggin and Holster. But they couldn't think of a name for Uncle Debo, so they thought, well, we'll just call him the boy until something better comes along. And then through the wonders of time and syllabic manipulation, the boy became da boy, which eventually became Debo. And the reason we called him Uncle is because as the last of 17 children, he had nieces and nephews who were quite a bit older than he was. So it was not uncommon to be walking down Main Street and hear some matronly niece yell out, "Uncle Debo, you pull your pants up right now." Or I'm going to tell Grandma. So everybody in town just called the poor kid Uncle Debo. And now, as the last of 17 children, his older brothers and sisters, they were way older than him, but they didn't treat him like, he was distant from them in age, but they didn't feel like his parents, so they just taught him things that other grown-ups wouldn't necessarily teach young children. He just knew stuff that the rest of us didn't know. For example, his older brothers and sisters, for whatever reason, because older brothers and sisters are horrible people, that's why. I'm the last of 5 myself, so I understand this. They had taught him all about strike anywhere matches. They taught him these wonderful ways to strike anywhere matches, and so Uncle Debo walked around with just pockets full of strike anywhere matches all the time. And he would sing a song that went like, strike anywhere matches, strike 'em anywhere, man. Strike anywhere matches, strike 'em fast as you can. You can strike 'em on your teeth, you can strike 'em on your thumb, you can strike 'em on your bum, you can strike 'em on your zipper, you can strike 'em on your sister if she's a hairy upper lipper. And it just went on like that. And also, they had taught him, or got him to believe, that not only did aliens exist, but that aliens existed for the sole purpose of one day coming and abducting Uncle Debo. So the kid walked around with matches in his pockets and fear of alien abduction at any moment. But he was a great friend to have because, again, he knew all these wonderful ways to light strike anywhere matches. Like he knew that if you took a piece of firewood and laid it flat on the ground, you could stand strike anywhere matches up, just kind of force them down so the tip was up, and then you could take a hatchet. And if you hit the match just right, you could split the match in 2. And if you hit it perfectly, not only could you split it, but you could light it. And that was good information when you're 7 or 8. You hearing me over here? And then he taught us that if you take the same piece of firewood, stand the matches up in them, take your BB gun, get about 10 yards away. If you can get the BB to go across the top of the match, you can light the match. But the best way that he ever taught us to light strike anywhere matches was if you take an unlit strike anywhere match and you drop it down the barrel of your BB gun. And then you fire it. When the match comes out of the aperture at the end of the barrel, it will rub against the aperture and ignite, and you can shoot burning projectiles at your friends. We used to make paper airplanes and try and shoot down each other's paper airplanes. It was just not uncommon on a summer evening in $50 West Virginia to see fireflies and lit matches just flying through the sky. It was a beautiful time in our life. Now, you don't see strike anywhere matches that much anymore, and I wondered why, so I went to the internet, because, I wanted the truth, and I typed in strike anywhere matches, and the first site that comes up, like just about everything, is Amazon. And when you go to strike anywhere matches on Amazon, there are 2 prices: new, and used. So if you're in the market for some used strike anywhere matches, that's the place to go. But the reason I found out that you don't see them much anymore is because we live in such a litigious society. And it turns out that if you have a box of strike anywhere matches and you shake it vigorously, the matches can rub against each other, ignite, the box will explode, and your house will burn down. Or, and I think if you shake a box of Strike Anywhere matches, you just get what's coming to you. I don't think you get to sue. Or if you just have them sitting there on your table, a mouse will come in your house, chew through the box, chew on a match, the match will ignite, the box will explode, your house will burn down. But I don't think that's true, because Skeeter and I were Boy Scouts, and we used to go on hiking trips, right? And we would have, now as Eagle Scouts, I can light a fire under almost any condition with 2 matches, usually have one good one left over, right? We were supposed to be able to light a fire with 2 matches, but why? Why light a fire with 2 matches when you could build a fire out of matches? So when we would go on camping trips, hiking trips, we'd have on our big external frame backpacks. And in those backpacks, there'd be a pair of socks that we had no intention of changing into, a loaf of bread, a pound of bologna, and 200,000 Strike Anywhere matches. And we would go uphill and downhill and on winding trails, and kids would fall and roll down ravines. Nobody pushed them, as far as I know. And they would just fall head over heels all the way down, 200,000 matches. Never, not once, no matter how many times we tried, did a kid explode. So I just don't think the Strike Anywhere matches are all that dangerous. Now, one day we were out there, because we were kids, and so we were scientists. All children are natural scientists. And so Skeeter and I set out to find out if you could, in fact, strike a Strike Anywhere match anywhere. And the answer is no. You cannot strike a Strike Anywhere match on pudding, and you cannot strike a Strike Anywhere match underwater, but you can strike a Strike Anywhere match on grape nuts, just in case you're wondering. And Skeeter said, I wonder if we can strike a Strike Anywhere match on Jell-O. And we couldn't. And we thought about it for a minute. And I said, well, now, hold on a second. Let's think about this scientifically. What if we stretched the Jell-O? And Skeeter said, well, what would that do for us? And I said, well, everybody knows that Jell-O is composed of 2 natural occurring elements, water and Jell-O crystals. Jell-O crystals, I don't know if you're aware of this, but they're mined in a big surface mine out in Utah. And it's one of the deepest mines in the world. And actually, the deeper you go, the striations, there's different colors. The lighter colors are at the top, and the deeper so like your lemon and your lime is at the top. That's actually how they got mixed, because they're right on top of each other, so that line where they meet is where we got lemon lime. And then all the way down at the bottom is your raspberries and your blueberry. So you get those Jell-O crystals, and they're sharp. But when you mix them with water, the water atoms surround the Jell-O atoms. I said to Skeeter, and also to you. So if you could stretch the Jell-O, you could get the Jell-O crystals to pop up out of the water, and then you could run your match along the crystals, and you could light your match. And Skeeter said, why would that be necessary? Which was a dumb question. But I said, well, what if we were at a picnic, and a blizzard hit, and all we had to strike our match on was a bowl full of Jell-O? And he said, how on earth could that be the situation, Why wouldn't we just light it on the wood or the table? And I'm like, I don't know, but let's just say you have to light it on the Jell-O. So we set out to stretch Jell-O, but the only way we could stretch Jell-O was by sucking it through a straw, and then it was covered with a plastic straw, and we couldn't strike this match on it. But that led to Skeeter saying, I bet anything can stretch. Now, this is the sort of idea that's the bread and butter of childhood. When you have an idea like anything can stretch, you want to have that in the morning so that you have all day long to experiment. You don't want to have that at night, because then you're going to lay in bed all night long worried that some kid on the other side of the world, where it's morning, is going to have that idea, and by the time you get up, they're going to have proven it and won the Nobel Prize, and you're just out of luck. So you got to have the good ideas early. Skeeter said, I bet anything can stretch. And I said, yeah, but I bet some things are going to stretch further than others. I said, for example, I bet you could stretch a frog a lot further than you could stretch a Coke bottle. And that's true. Don't stretch a frog. And Skeeter said, well, we need a stretching machine. Now, fortunately, each of us owned half of a stretching machine. Mine was a Schwinn, and Skeeter's was a Huffy. And what we did was we tied a rope to the seat post of each bike, and then whatever we were going to stretch, we put in the middle, we tied that, and then we just rode in opposite directions. And we were very scientific about it. I found the list recently, and it said, what we do is we take, let's say we were going to stretch a sock. We'd measure it. We had a yardstick. We had half a yardstick. We'd measure, and then we'd write down sock, 8 inches and 5 little lines. And then we'd tie it, And we'd ride in different directions, and then we'd remeasure it, and now it was 12 inches and 8 little lines. So, we had stretched it a good 4 inches and I don't know how many little lines. So, sock, 4 inches, a garden hose, 3 feet, Coke bottle, didn't really stretch at all. Cinder block, also didn't stretch. Sister's hair dryer, stretched the cord right out of it. Sister's curling iron, same result. Cat. Yeah. Didn't stretch far, but it stretched loud. No animals were hurt in the creation of this story. But we were determined to stretch the cinder block. We focused on that, but we realized that it's not that the cinder block can't stretch. It's just that our stretching machine wasn't powerful enough to stretch it. And then we realized that each of our fathers owned a stretching machine, and my dad's was a Ford, and Skeeter's dad was an International Harvester. And so we put ropes around the back bumpers and tied those through the cinder block, and then we stole the keys, and we stretched the bumpers off the back of both cars. And my dad was well aware that Skeeter and I were the kind of kids that, if we hadn't been physically wounded in our activity, we hadn't learned anything. And so he wouldn't just tell us to stop, he had to divert us. And he showed us how if we took an inner tube, like a bike tire inner tube, and stretched it between 2 fence posts, that you then had the world's greatest slingshot, that you could send a water balloon about 3 counties. And we were out there one night shooting water balloons, and I said, what we ought to do, Skeet? We ought to put Jell-O in the water balloons. Because think about this. If you hit somebody with a water balloon, what happens? They get wet, but then they walk away cleaner, If you hit somebody with a Jell-O balloon, first of all, that's a lot more viscous, and so it's going to hurt more. But secondly, it's going to be sticky, so they're going to draw bugs. So it's a much better weapon. And here's how, this just for science, young people, this is science or art. It can go either way. I don't know if you lean towards science or art, but what you do is you take the balloon, deflate it, and you get like a funnel, and you pour some Jell-O crystals into it, and then you put the water in, and you tie it, and you shake it up, and then you put it in the refrigerator overnight, and it congeals, right? And it's science or art, either way. Because if you have a yellow balloon, and you put blue Jell-O in it, what color is it going to be? Green, right? And that is science or art, either way you want to go. So we were out at the reservoir one night. There was a reservoir in town, city water, and there was a parking lot down there where the older kids would go and discuss philosophy. But Skeeter and I didn't have philosophy partners at this stage, and so we were down there with our giant slingshot, and we were shooting Jell-O balloons into the reservoir to flavor the water of the town, right? And it was dusk, and just as the sun set, Sheriff Hasbro came over in his helicopter. Sheriff Hasbro was the law there in Half Dollar, Dry County, and he had written a grant to get a helicopter. He was a big man, and so he didn't fit. This wasn't like the little helicopter you see at the beginning of MASH. This was one of those double-rotor giant Chinook cargo helicopters, and so it had the side doors, and both those doors were open, and he was flying it, practicing so he could use it. I don't know what he wanted it for, but he flew out over the parking lot, and then he flew over the dam, and then he flew over the reservoir, and he got about halfway across the reservoir, and he turned the helicopter sideways. Well, we were not shooting Jell-O balloons at the sheriff's helicopter. I want to be clear. But he had both those side doors open, so we just wanted to see if we could get Jell-O balloons to go through the helicopter. And then he turned all the way around, and it was dark by this point, and he turned on this giant spotlight on the front of the helicopter, and he started to come back toward us across the lake, and we were still launching Jell-O balloons, and then we heard, even over the rotor noises, we heard somebody screaming, and Uncle Debo came running up the other side of the dam, and he was bathed in the spotlight from that helicopter, and we were hitting him with Jell-O balloons. He just happened to be in our way, so we were just landing Jell-O balloons on him and all around him, and he was screaming. He was hysterical. He was screaming, "They're here. They're here." The aliens are here for me, and they're dropping their eggs on me. They're trying to impregnate me. Well, by now we had him, bore-sighted, so we were just nailing him. And he was running straight for us. He was just in a blind panic. And we realized that he was running straight for our slingshot, and he was going to hit it because he was just so panicked. He couldn't see anything. And I didn't want Uncle Debo to trip on the slingshot because that would hurt the poor kid. And so I said the only thing that I could think to say. I said jump. And Skeeter went through the same process, and he said the only thing he thought was helpful. He said duck. And Uncle Debo did both. And so he kind of jumped and he kind of bent over, and he almost made it. He got everything but 1 foot over the slingshot, and that foot kind of got tangled up in the slingshot, and then he stretched out with it, and he slammed into the asphalt, and then the slingshot started to drag him back toward us across the asphalt, and his pants just exploded. From the matches, in case you missed that. And then we heard some matronly niece yell out from somewhere in the parking lot, "Uncle Debo, you put your pants out right now, or I'm going to tell Grandma." Thank you. So as Crystal mentioned, I did just put out this new book called That Ain't the Whole Plan. And it's a whole bunch of Skeeter stories. And I've been writing Skeeter stories. I think I wrote the first one in 1997. So I've been writing these things for a long time. And in the book, they're in chronological order, not of when they were written, but Skeeter and I's age, because we progress. There's stories that start when we were 5, and then they go all the way up until we're adults. And I think this is the second. The story I'm about to tell you is the second story. The story I just told you is not the first one. But I think this one is the second Skeeter story that I ever wrote. We went out to Montana. Skeeter and I did. We went out to Flathead County, Montana, a little place called Swan Lake. We were going to do a little black bear hunting. Now, don't worry, no bears were hurt in this story. We didn't even see any black bear. They forfeited. I think what it was that we were in a minivan, and no self-respecting bear wants to be killed by a guy in a minivan. So we drove. We drove, 3/4 of the way across the United States of America. Didn't have any problems until we got the last 50 miles to our campsite. We were on a 2-lane road, and all of a sudden, a 50-foot RV just materialized on the back bumper of the minivan. And there were 3 guys apparently in that minivan, and they wanted to pass us. But this was not a road that was engineered for a 50-foot RV to pass a minivan. I mean, there was a cliff on this side going down and a cliff on this side going up, and you'd come around the next curve, and those would swap. But the 3 guys thought that was our fault. And each one of them was leaned out a different window yelling at us. Now, they only knew 5 words, but they could use those words in sort of a tonal swear language with accompanying hand gestures that really made it clear what they were expressing. And Skeeter said, man, he said, those guys he was driving, he said, those guys are driving that thing like a summer assault vehicle. And finally, there was a wide spot in the road, and that RV shot out from behind us and tore off down the highway. And then I had to go about 40 miles listening to my best friend not finish a sentence. The rest of the way there, he was like, if I ever get the chance, Jupiter. And finally, we got to the campsite, and we checked in, and they assigned us our campsite, and we went over, and we were unpacking our stuff, and I looked over, and lo and behold, on the other side of the campground, there was that 50-foot RV with those 3 fellas still speaking their 5-word tonal swear language, only now they had a cooler out, and they were about a quarter way through that cooler. Well, I didn't say anything. I had just listened to Skeeter for 40 miles, not finished a sentence about what he was going to do if he ever saw those guys again, so I just thought I'd wait and see what happened. And we finished setting up our campsite, and we ate supper, and I couldn't take it anymore. And finally I said, Skeeter, there's those guys. Aren't you going to go do something? And he looked at them for a while. By this time, they were about halfway through that cooler. And he said, Bill, those look like the kind of guys that can cause themselves trouble. Let's just sit here and see what happens. And about a half an hour later, when it was good and dark, they figured out that right behind their campsite was a barbed wire fence. And on the other side of that barbed wire fence was a herd of cows. And I guess they decided they were going to do some cow tipping. Now, I don't know if you have heard about cow tipping here in cosmopolitan Jonesboro, Tennessee. Maybe you read about it in a sociology class, but if you haven't, what happens is it is said that cows sleep standing up with their knees locked, and you can walk up beside them and push them over. Apparently, it's a lot of fun for everybody but the cow. And these guys decided they were going to do some cow tipping, so they climbed over that fence, and they started to creep drunkenly. They started to drunkenly creep across that field. And they knocked over a couple of cows, and they were having a good time. And then they looked over, and there, in that field, standing all alone, just like on the back of an old nickel, there was a buffalo standing on a little knoll. And those guys decided that they were going to do some buffalo tipping. Now, I bet that you've heard of cow tipping. I will also bet that you haven't heard of buffalo tipping. And the reason you haven't heard of buffalo tipping is the same reason that you have never heard of elk tipping or elephant tipping or alligator rolling. And that is because those are dumb ideas. And so some man has tried it, and he died a horrible death, and his wife was so embarrassed that she just told you he ran off with a younger woman instead of explaining alligator tipping. So they got up beside that buffalo, and they put their hands on it, and they started to push, but that buffalo was a lot bigger than those cows. And I think what happens inside a cow's mind as it's being tipped, it's asleep, and then it realizes it's like right here, it wakes up, and it goes, huh? And then bam, it hits the ground. But I think when you tip a buffalo, it gets about right here. And it wakes up and it goes, huh? So that buffalo woke up and it started to scrape the ground. And those three guys took off across that field and jumped that barbed wire fence with enough grace and agility to qualify for the International Inebriated Olympics. If only there were such a thing. And after about a half an hour, once they'd caught their breath, Skeeter nudged me. And he said, come on, it's time to go cause those fellas some trouble. So we walked over, and we introduced ourselves, and we made some small talk. And finally, one of those guys said, so, what are y'all doing out here? And Skeeter said, oh, yeah. He said, we're working on our doctoral theses. And they said, what are you studying? And I got to tell you, I was just as interested as those fellas were to find out what we were studying. And Skeeter said, oh, yeah, we're studying supernatural bovine theology. And one of those guys said, say what? And Skeeter said, yeah, we're out here studying the great cow goddess, Montina. And they said, Montina? I ain't never heard of Montina. And I said, sure you have. The whole state's named after her. And then Skeeter launched into the doctrine and the dogma of the great cow goddess Montina. He said, in the beginning was the herd. And the herd was good, and Montina was up there in the heavens, and she was a little bit lonely. So she thought she'd just do some creative stuff to see if that made her feel better. And she started to create the universe as we know it, with the stars and the constellations. And then she created, Skeeter explained, she created the galaxies and then the solar systems. But she still was a little bit lonely, so she created our solar system and the planet Earth. And then she thought, I'm going to create two cows and put them on the Earth. And so she created the first two cows, Botox and Bowtie. And she put them... She put them down in the pasture of Eden and gave them domain over all the pastures and grasses of the earth. And then Skeeter kind of paused, like, you know, he was trying to figure out what to say, maybe. And he said, but Montina told them that they could never, ever go down to the pond of life. Well, they could go, they just couldn't drink from the pond of life. But, of course, you know, after a while, they were pretty happy. I mean, they were pretty happy for a while, but then they got a little bit bored because, Skeeter explained, and he winked to make sure that everybody knew that this was just a joke and nobody should be offended by it. He said, the difference between this story and the Adam and Eve story is there's no bowl in this story. And so, it's just a joke. And so, Botox and Bowtie were both cows, and so, you know, they got a little bit bored, so they just thought they'd go down to the pond of life. Not to drink from it, just to look. And when they got there was a frog. And as you've already guessed, this was not just an ordinary frog. This was a handsome, smooth-talking bullfrog. And that frog told those two cows, if you kiss me, I'll turn into a bull prince. And one of those fellows was like, hey, I think I have heard this story before. And I was like, yeah, it's an old one. And so, sure enough, they kissed that frog, and he turned into a bull prince, and he proceeded to show them some things they might not thought of on their own. And before long, Botox and Bowtie were with calf, Skeeter explained. Well, Montina got wind of this. And she came down to see what was happening. And she called out for Botox and Bowtie, but they didn't come out. Finally, they did. And she said, why were you hiding? And they said, we were naked and ashamed. And Montina said, you're cows. You're not naked. And so she was so upset that she kicked Botox and Bowtie out of the pasture of Eden and explained that from that point on they would be ruled over by men in big hats with pointy boots. And with that, Skeeter concluded the doctrine and the dogma of the great cow goddess Montina. And we all sat and thought about that for a minute. And then one of those guys said, well, how come you're studying that out here? And Skeeter looked at me like it was my turn. And I said, well, because we think this herd of cows right here might be the sacred remnant of the great cow goddess Montina, of her original herd. And they said, well, are they protected by like federal law or something? And I said, they're protected by a force far greater than federal law. They're protected by the great cow goddess Montina. And one of those guys said, well, what if you messed with them? And I said, you didn't, did you? And he said, no, not well. We might have. He said, what if you tried to tip one? I said, you didn't, did you? He said, no, not well. Well, we might have. And Skeeter said, well, the one thing you got going for you is at least there was no buffalo out in that field. And they said, oh, there was a buffalo. And Skeeter said, no, not a buffalo, a bluffalo. And they said, what's a bluffalo? And Skeeter said, the bluffalo is the great spirit that Montina sends to watch over her herd. He said, you didn't try and tip that bluffalo, did you? And they said, yes, we did. And Skeeter said, then you're in a lot of trouble, because the bluffalo is a great believer in the doctrine of an eye for an eye and a hoof for a hoof. And if you tried to tip that bluffalo is going to try and tip you. And they said, well, what do we do? And Skeeter said, look, I think I can help you, but you have to do exactly what I tell you. He said, what I want you to do is go in your camper. I want you to lie down, and I want you to lock the doors, shut the windows, pull the blinds. I want you to lie down in your beds and assume the prone defense. Now, the prone defense isn't a defense you hear a lot about. You don't see a lot of football coaches and basketball coaches running up and down the sidelines yelling, go prone, go prone. But we figured those guys were just drunk enough that if they lay down, they'd go to sleep. So sure enough, they got up and they started running. And Skeeter said, whatever you hear, whatever you feel, whatever you smell, don't you dare come out. Don't even get out of bed. And they jumped up in that camper, and the windows shut, the blinds went down, the doors shut, the lights went out. And we went back over to our campsite for about 45 minutes to give them time to fall asleep. And then we crept up to the side of that camper. And first, I just made some bluffalo noises. I just kind of like that. Now, at that point in my life, that's what I thought a buffalo sounded like. But then I went out to Yellowstone with my family. You ever been out to Yellowstone? And you come around a curve in the road, and there's just a buffalo. It'll just be standing right there in the middle of the road. And if your windows are down, it'll stick its head in your window, in your car window, and then it'll make a buffalo noise. And at this moment, if you don't mind, I'm going to do my buffalo impersonation. Which is fine if it's a rental. But anyway, I didn't know that's what buffalo sounded like back then, so I just kind of like that. And then I put my ear up to the side of the camper. I couldn't hear anything, so we put our plan into action. I took a piece of firewood, and I put that about, midway down the frame of that RV. And then Skeeter got his hydraulic jack. This is a dandy of a jack. It'll go up like 3 feet in about 30 seconds. And we put that on the piece of firewood, and then we just started to crank it up. And pretty soon that camper started to lean over just a little bit. Put our hands on the side. We were going to do some camper tipping. It's harmless. And when that thing got about right there, we heard thump, 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 the sound of three very drunk men rolling out of their cots onto the floor of their camper. And then we got the thing to go over, and just as we hoped, it went over that barbed wire fence, and that buffalo out there in the field started scraping the ground. Apparently, buffaloes don't like large white rectangles falling into their fields in the middle of the night. That buffalo started running right toward that camper. And if there's one thing you can be sure of in this lifetime, it's that the engineers who designed RVs never stopped once to ask themselves, how are we going to buffalo-proof the roof of that RV? That buffalo went through the roof of that RV like a bullet through a bucket. It was just bouncing around inside there. And those three fellas were climbing out the windows that were on top of it now, screaming, the buffalo, the buffalo, the buffalo. And Skeeter said, save yourselves. And they said, what do we do? And Skeeter said, take off all your clothes. And men in extreme emotional distress will do amazing things. 3 pair of underwear just went flying through the sky. I said, do the dance of the buffalo. And they said, what's the dance of the buffalo? And I started to do my best Kevin Costner from Dances with Wolves. Pretty soon there were 3 naked men on top of the camper doing the dance of the buffalo. And even in the middle of nowhere, Montana, it does not take long for the authorities to get wind of that sort of situation. Before long, we heard the sheriff cars coming, and we just went back to our campsite and got in our tent, got in our sleeping bags, and we listened to the sweet, melodious sounds of 3 very drunk, very naked men trying to explain to a very humorless sheriff just exactly why they were doing the naked dance of the buffalo on the side of their camper in the middle of the night. And I turned to Skeeter, and I said, that was a good plan. He said, yeah, it was one of my best. He said, I sure turned that summer assault vehicle into a somersault vehicle. So my dad was the minister at the Methodist church, and I would sit there in church like a good, obedient young person, and if he looked at me, he probably thought I was looking at him. But like a good, obedient person in church, child, young person, I was counting whatever I could count, right? Ceiling panels, rafters, windows. In this case, I was trying to count the pipes in the pipe organ. But it's really hard because there's thousands of them. We have this pipe organ, had this pipe organ, so there was the altar, and on each side of the altar there was pipes that kind of went up like that. And then on top of or above the altar, there was another set of pipes that went up like that. And the little tiny pipes were closest to the altar, and then they got bigger as they went out. And then, so it looked like Batman's cape and Batman's cowl. And then right in the middle of that is a stained glass window with a picture of Jesus doing this number. And he's in a red robe, and he's, like welcoming the sheep or whatever. And I always felt so comforted by that because I knew that either Batman or Jesus was looking out for me. And when I couldn't figure out a way to count, because there's thousands of pipes in a standard pipe organ, when I couldn't figure out a way to count them effectively, I started wondering, because I don't know anything about music. I am the least musical person that you were ever going to meet. As a matter of fact, when I sang earlier the Strike Anywhere Matches song, I'm actually contractually obligated. As soon as I cross the Jonesboro city line, I am not allowed to sing. Certainly not on stage. I don't even think I'm allowed to hum in my hotel room. But anyway, I'm the least musical person that you're ever going to meet. So I started to wonder if the air that makes the noise for the organ, if it comes out of the pipe or if the noise gets made by like the air getting sucked in. And I was trying to figure out how to figure that out when I struck upon an idea. And so later that week, because my dad was the minister, I could get in the church anytime I wanted, I started to do a little experiment. I took a ladder, and I went and I found the pipes. I needed just the right pipe. They had to be a couple of rows back so nobody could see what was going on. And, about the size of my thumb, maybe. And I set my experiment in motion, and I waited for the next Sunday, and I watched the pipes, and nothing happened. And I thought, well, a couple of things could have gone wrong. One, I have no idea which pipes are even in use as they're playing a song, or it just failed. So I thought the best thing to do is just do more experiment. So I went back into the church that week, and I did a few more elements to my experiment. And the next Sunday, sure enough, just at the end of the last song, the organist hit a sustaining note, and about 4 rows back in the pipes, a little red balloon just stood up like that. And then when he finished, it went back down. And then I knew that at least some of the pipes, the air came out. And so I was satisfied. I turned to Skeeter. We were not allowed to sit together in church. I turned to Skeeter, and he'd seen it too. And so that week, I went into the church, and I got all of the balloons out. And then we got a new bishop. In the Methodist Church, there's, it's divided up into conferences, and there's bishops all over the country. And when you get a new bishop, what happens is that bishop tries to come to each church in the conference during their first couple of months to preach a sermon. And that lets the congregants know whether the bishop got to be a bishop because of their theology or because they just had to get, we just needed them out of the way. And so the bishop got up there, and I was reading the bulletin. It had his bio in it, and it turns out that he had been a liturgical clown. These are people who clown for Jesus. I want to say don't laugh, but that's the point. And they take it really seriously, too. And so I turned to look at Skeeter to see if he had gotten to that point in the biography, and he had. And so we were kind of giggling. I mean, I got nothing against liturgical clowns, but when you find out that the leader of your church is a clown, it's hard to take sometimes. And he was walking up the stairs to go to the pulpit to deliver his sermon, and the organist hit a sustaining note, and it turns out that I had not cleared all of the balloons out of the pipes. And this was a big, long, green balloon that just stood up, and there were gasps and giggles both from the congregation, which was satisfactory. And the bishop didn't know why, because he wasn't facing the organ, and then that big, long, green balloon just popped off, and it went through the air. And the bishop grabbed it, and he blew a little more air into it, tied a knot in it, turned it into a Tyrannosaurus Rex, and handed it to a kid in the front row. And immediately, I liked that bishop a whole lot more. Now, in our church, we played bingo on Wednesday nights. Now, it wasn't gambling, because Methodists aren't allowed to gamble. You scored quarters if you won bingo. But it wasn't gambling, because you paid a certain amount of quarters to get your card, and then if you won bingo, then you scored. You went up and collected your score, of course, just how we kept score. You got to keep them when you went home. But they deducted 10% right away, so you tithed out of your score. And but it was contentious because we weren't supposed to gamble, and so some people were really against it. And then there was also a lot of kind of politics. We had a little lady in our church named Lillian Krim, and she was a mean woman. Mrs. Crankberry was the meanest woman that I ever met in my life, and she had been the chairwoman for the committee for little old ladies who want to be angry about something. But when she died, Lillian Krim took her place. And Lillian, I don't want to say she cheated. Nobody thought she cheated at bingo. We knew she cheated at bingo because she would just save her cards from last week that already had dots on them, and so she could bingo in one ball. And so she didn't like to lose bingo. And the bishop came to kind of check out the whole bingo situation, and he won several times. Now, we didn't organize it so that he won, so that he'd feel good because he scored a whole bunch of quarters. It worked out that he won. And this made Lillian really, really mad. And so there was more politics going on with it. And finally, it was decided that we were just going to have to cancel the bingo games completely. And so we were going to have one last bingo game, and the bishop was going to come because he liked playing bingo. And we got down there, and it melted down quickly when it was just about over, and Lillian had not bingoed that entire night. She was so upset, she got up from the table, and she went. The bingo balls, that cage thing they're in, it's like round with chicken wire around it, and then you spin it like this and reach in and grab. She grabbed that, the whole thing of balls, and she started to run into the sanctuary. Well, this other lady, May wasn't going to let that happen. May and Lillian didn't get along, so May started to chase Lillian. But it wasn't like a high-speed chase because they both had walkers. So Lillian had the bingo balls, on top of her walker, and she was moving like that as fast as she could. And then May was chasing her, and then my dad was, of course, he had to do something, and the bishop was in there. May caught up to Lillian in the sanctuary, and they each had one end of that bingo ball thing, and they were pulling it as hard as they could, and it just ripped in half, and bingo balls just flew all over the church. They went into the balcony. They were rolling around the offering plates like roulette. They went everywhere. And then May and Lillian fell on the ground, and my dad was like, "Oh my gosh, I thought you two ladies were gonna kill each other." And May said, "Lillian Krim, she's never gonna be dead until she gets what she wants, and that is one last bingo." But that wasn't true. She died. We were at the funeral. She died not too long after that. We were at the funeral, and it was an open casket funeral, and she was in there. There was a lot of people that came to the church because she was a cantankerous old woman, but she worked with the OSS during the Second World War, so she was kind of a hero as well. And she had her medals across her chest in her coffin, and then her hands folded like this, and there was a rose, and underneath the rose there was an unfinished bingo card. And the bishop had come to deliver her funeral, to do a sermon, because he, even though they didn't get along, they liked each other. He was been in the church for a long time. He knew how to deal with women like that, people like that. And as he was walking up to the pulpit to deliver his sermon, the organist hit a sustaining note, and a bingo ball popped up out of the pipes, went over the bishop's head, and he went up to catch it, and Lillian Krim sat up in her coffin. Snatched it, said B8, looked at her card, said bingo, and then fell dead. And May, in the back of the congregation, stood up, pulled her purse up on her shoulder, and said, "See, I told you." She said, "I saw what I came to see," and she left. The end. Thank you. I don't know what I'm going to tell next. Any requests?
School teacher.
School teacher. The Wonder Woman? I can't do it in 15 minutes.
The gifts for your wife.
The what?
The gifts in advance for your wife.
Okay, yeah, I can do that in 15 minutes. The Yellowstone story is too long. So, when I got married, first of all, let me say this. I have said some things. I've been married almost 30 years now, 29 years, I think. In that time, I have managed to say some things to my wife that she misheard. It's the best way I can explain it. Like, we were driving recently, and we saw this jogger, this woman who was probably in her 20s, and she was like 5'8", and she wasn't jogging to get fit. She was jogging to maintain a high level of fitness. And my wife is not in her 20s, and she's not 5'8", and she said, "I'm going to start jogging, and I'm going to look like that." And I said, "You're going to get younger and taller?" And she somehow misheard that. And then I told her one time, I just thought I was being nice. I told her the next time I marry a woman in her 20s, I'm not going to take it for granted. And then she got this eye cream. She went down to like the Cayman Islands, and she got this wrinkle cream that you put like right here. It's about the size. The container's like the size of a $50 and probably that tall. I don't know. You can't buy it in the States. It's made out of something illegal, like, I don't know, endangered octopus brain or something like that. And so she put it like right here. And after a couple of days, she came in and she said, "Is it working?" And I said, "Yeah, it really is. Those wrinkles are gone." And then I just asked a scientific question. I said, "Can you just use it on your eyes? Or can you use it all over?" It's just science. That's all. It's just a. And then she said, like, one July, I'm going to take a pottery class, and then I can make pottery, and we can give it to all our relatives for Christmas next year. And I said, "Well, we better get them something nice this year." And then she was like, 8.5 months pregnant, and she was in the bathtub, and so, her belly was sticking out, and there was water in her belly button. And I said, "You look like a breaching whale." And she would have killed me, but she was 8 months pregnant and couldn't get out of the tub. So I knew when we got married that there might be things that I did wrong along the way. There was just going to be a chance, right? I knew this from the beginning. So I thought what I'm going to do is I'm always, always, always going to have a good gift for every sanctioned gift-giving occasion throughout the year. And that way, if I do something wrong, I can at least fall back on it and say, well, yeah, but I got you whatever for whatever. And so Christmas, well, let's start at the beginning. Beginning of the year, Valentine's Day, her birthday, our anniversary, Mother's Day, and Christmas. Those are the big ones, right? And now our anniversary and Mother's Day are usually the same week. And so she lets me get her one gift for both Mother's Day and our anniversary, provided it's a gift that's suitable for two gift-giving occasions. So as our 10th anniversary was approaching, I wanted to get something really nice. I wanted to, even though I was pretty good at this, I wanted to outdo myself and get something really nice. We knew a guy. He was a local potter. He's actually a famous potter. And a famous potter is a lot like being a famous storyteller. No one has heard of you. He's got stuff in the Smithsonian. And so I asked him if he would, for our anniversary, if he would make a four-piece place setting for eight settings at our table. So a supper plate, a bread plate, a cup, and a bowl. And so he made this wonderful four-piece, eight-place setting for our 10th anniversary, and I gave it to my wife, and she loved it so much. I mean, she really, really loved it. She loved it so much that I felt like I had done such a good job that I now had one gift in escrow, right? Like, now maybe I could forget one, but no, it doesn't work that way. I learned. It's a rookie mistake 10 years in. And then like the next year, I was at a storytelling festival in St. Louis. I was staying in downtown St. Louis. I could look out of my hotel room into Cardinal Stadium. But it was a weird place because there wasn't any shops around, and I didn't have a car, so I couldn't get anywhere to get my wife an anniversary present. So I called her on the phone, and I said, honey, I'm really in a jam here. I can't get anywhere to get you an anniversary present. I said, the only place I can go is the Cardinals ball stadium. I could get you a St. Louis Cardinals ball cap. And she said, I don't want a St. Louis Cardinals ball cap for my 11th anniversary. Because, she's a Twins fan. Not Twins, a Braves fan. And so I said, this is what I can get you. And she said, I don't want that. And men, you're hearing this the way I heard it. I said, this is the thing I can get you. She said, I don't want that. I heard, you don't have to get me anything. If the one thing you could get me is something I don't want, then you're free, right? So I got home. And about 3 days later, the cold front had definitely blown in. There was no stealing kisses when nobody was looking or hugs or anything like that. And I couldn't figure out what was wrong. And so finally, I did what my Uncle Paul taught me at my wedding rehearsal. He said, if you're ever in trouble, and you don't know why, just go like this. What? So I went, what? She said, you didn't buy me an anniversary present. And I said, well, you told me I didn't have to. I said, I could get you a ball cap. You said you didn't want a ball cap. Well, that didn't work. Believe it or not, that didn't fly. And so the next thing coming up to get her a gift was her birthday, which is at the end of June. And so I asked her, like at the beginning of June, what do you want for your birthday? And she said, don't get me anything for my birthday. Now, this is a trick. She said, we're going on that cruise the first week of July. Just get me something nice on the cruise. So we went on the cruise. We stopped at like 7 different Central American countries, and I bought her like a handmade silver necklace and a handmade bowl that I don't even know what it does except sit on a table for 20 years now. And I bought her like a handmade shirt and a ring. I got her all kinds of stuff. And we got home, and like 3 days later, the cold front, and I was like, what? She said, you didn't buy me a birthday present. I'm like, what are you talking about? I just helped the national domestic, money. I just helped the finances. Gross national product of 7 Central American countries. And she was like, you didn't say any of them were my birthday present. I was like, oh, this is hard. That was in July. So my next chance was Christmas. And so in August, I said, what do you want for Christmas? She said, well, I want a subscription to this magazine, because this was a long time ago, right? She said, I want a subscription to this magazine. And then she said, I want these 2 pieces of art framed. And I wrote that down. I'm like, yeah, I can handle that. And then we were at my sister's house, and my sister had a mother's bracelet. Now, you don't see these as much anymore, but back then they were really a thing. And it was a mother's bracelet, so it's a bracelet, and it has these little sterling silver cubes on it, and on each one there's a letter of the alphabet, and so it spells out your child's names, or your children's names. And obviously, you have to have these handcrafted, because, you know, what are the chances you're just going to find one with both your kids' name on? So you got to go to this website, and then there's a lot of other little sparkly, jewelly, expensive things that you have to include, because she might go to the website later and see that you could have bought more stuff. And so we were at my sister's house, and my wife held up my sister's mother's bracelet, and she said, I want one of these for Christmas. I wrote that down, and she said, but, because she knows, she's known this for a long time, if you want me to know something, you have to speak to me like a 3-year-old, okay? Don't assume that I understand what you're talking about. She said, I want one of these, but I want our children's names on it. That's helpful information, So I had those things lined up, but I wanted to go out. I wanted to do something special. I wanted to get her something that was really going to, take it over the top, something that I had come up with myself. And in October, I was driving to the post office, and I passed this old theater that they were renovating now. And it said West Virginia. They had a new marquee with Art Deco letters, and it said West Virginia Spa right down the marquee, WVSSPA. Yeah. WVSSP. Right, there was no apostrophe, but that's okay. We don't put apostrophes in possessive words in West Virginia so that we can put them in unpossessive words. It just works better that way. So I said, West Virginia Spa, coming soon. And I thought, what a great idea. I'm going to go in there, and I'm going to buy my wife a gift certificate to a spa. And that way, one time when I go on a trip and she's had to be home with the children, I can get home, and then she can go and just spend a day at the spa and relax. So I thought, that's what I'm going to do, coming soon. But it didn't come soon. It was opening soon. It wasn't. It was now November, and it hadn't opened yet. And then it was the second week in December, and it hadn't opened. Then it was the third week in December, and finally it said grand opening. So I whipped in. I had my oldest child in the car with me, and we went in. My oldest child was like this tall at that point. And it didn't look like a spa. Now, I don't know what a spa looks like because I'd never been in one. But this didn't seem like a spa because there were cubicles. And then there was a big desk like this with a thing of peppermints. And my oldest child was reaching up like this trying to get the peppermints. And I was trying to pretend like I had taught them manners before this moment. And the little old lady behind the desk said, "Can I help you?" And I said, "I would like to buy a gift certificate." And she said, "For what?" And I thought, that's more information than you need to know, right? I said, "For the spa." No, she said, "For what?" And I said, "For Christmas." And she said, "For what?" And I said, "For the spa." She said, "What spa?" And I said, "This place." By now, people were looking over their cubicles and leaning around doors. She said, "What do you think this place is?" And I said, "I think it's a spa." I think I made that obvious. She said, "Why do you think it's a spa?" And I said, "Because the sign out front says WVSSPA, West Virginia Spa." She said, "No, that stands for the West Virginia School Service Personnel Association." And I said, "So you don't have gift certificates?" And she said, "No," and I nodded at my oldest child, and they stole a handful of peppermints, and we were running out of there. And I went to the other side of the town where it turns out there was another spa, and I got a gift certificate for that spa. And then, 2 days before Christmas, they ran a big story in the newspaper, the grand opening of the new offices of the West Virginia School Service Personnel Association, big picture. And before my wife could read that part of the paper, I took that story out of the newspaper, and I wrapped her gift certificate in that news story. So on Christmas morning, when she got that present, not only did she get the gift certificate, she also got this wonderful story to go along with it. And I did so well that I'm pretty sure I now have one gift in escrow. Thank you very much for coming out. I appreciate you coming to see me. I appreciate people that constantly support the Storytelling Center and the Storytelling Festival. Those of you who are here for the first time, I hope that you had a wonderful time. They do this every week, so you can come back and see different storytellers every week. And then, of course, the big event is the first full weekend in October is the National Storytelling Festival, where this town just goes crazy and 15,000 people come and there's 20 storytellers. It's a brilliant, brilliant event. So think about coming to that. Also, I do, as Crystal said, my copies of my new book, That Ain't the Whole Plan, are available out in the lobby, and I will meet you out there in a few minutes to, shake hands and stuff. So thank you very much. Hope to see you somewhere else.